Everyone, it's Sten here. I'm going to go through Cardano Foundation recently voted on the new constitution, and I thought it's interesting points in the counter-argument discussion that deserves some discussion. So I'm discussing now not as an ICC member, but as someone who were part of drafting this new constitution. Um, and the first thing I want to highlight is they're saying this potentially violates the tenant 5. So again, this is not their majority, it's their counter argument. So and I think it's a good discussion to have that discussion, but I wanted to offer some viewpoints on it. So the first I want to offer is that there was this blog post by Professor Agalos Kiayas on the 11 blockchain tenant. Some of them we used in Cardano, and there was even a Twitter space about this as well. I was part of it, Charles was part of it, Lloyd Duhan was part of it, and we discussed this. And one of the things we discussed is that tenants can conflict with each other. They can have weighting in terms of each other, what is most important, and it's up to the different blockchains how they interpret and implement them. So a blockchain like Cardano will likely have a high value to making sure we're decentralized, and this is part of tenant one, not to be slowed down or censored your transactions. Like another blockchain, like for example Solana, might have other values than what they highlight from their tenants. Maybe they would highlight to have a very low cost of transaction, as an example. Not so sure about this predictable, but that's another blog. But you get the point. The point is that different blockchains can use this research and they can adapt the tenants how they want. And one universal truth about these tenants is that they are conflicting with each other. They have some weighting against each other. So, for example, slowed down or censored, it's just a basic classic blockchain trilemma is an example of how this conflict. So you want as much decentralization as possible so you don't have censorship, but at the same time you want uh, something that's not spending resources unnecessarily, for example. So again, that's like a small crash, but it still just shows there is some tension between these tenants. Um, yeah, so that's the first thing. You need to weight tenants, and you weight them based on what's important in your blockchain. Um, but the second problem here is that we also need to look up the definition. So the core of the argument, and it's a reasonable thing to discuss for sure. I don't get me wrong. It's okay for Cardano Foundation to discuss this, absolutely. Is because we in SIP 1694 have implemented that you need to delegate a DREP before you can claim rewards. You could argue that if this consists of a lockup, then you are in violation of Tenet 5. That's the argument. And then you will basically be implementing a new constitution that will immediately be in conflict with the blockchain itself. And guess what? This is not something new. That's the first thing. We actually had constitutional debt already. We had a voting method for staking pools that actually were implemented after the interim constitution was already in place, where it seems that the developers had interpreted it a different way than what the intention was in the interim constitution and in the SIP itself. And this was fixed. So crashes, or what we call constitutional debt, is not in itself something to say that something is constitutional for. It has to be looked at as a whole. How is this dangerous to the blockchain, or is this like something we can resolve? As two very simple questions to ask. Uh, and then the other part of it uh, is it really a lockup? So if you look at just a quick search on Google, like a lockup usually is something like we're prevented from selling, transferring, or trading the token. So are you doing this? Tenet 5. So the Cardano blockchain shall not lock in an ADA owner's value. So are you prevented from claiming your rewards in a way that you can then sell it or transfer it or something like that? I would probably argue no, and that was what was argued by the delegators and the drafters when we made this, because we were aware of this tension. Uh, because what you're doing really is actually you are able to claim the rewards. You just have to delegate to a DREP, and that DREP can be an abstain DREP. So you're not forced into delegating to DREP. Your choice can be that I choose to abstain from this political system, and you're still able to claim it. So you, at the very least, you can say it's only a temporary lockup that can be resolved by the user themselves, and that's the most positive interpretation in terms of being in line with this. I would argue that it's not at all a lockup because you're not restricted. You're able to get and claim those rewards. You might actually even instead argue that if this becomes very high cost, then maybe it would be in violation of tenet 8 that you should not earn a reasonable spend resources because you have to spend one transactions to then be able to claim rewards. But it's very well known that you already have to do a transaction to claim rewards, and you do one more on top of that for a single time and then can claim again. So it seems not something unreasonable, even if the ADA price went to the moon or something like that. But maybe there's a theoretical where this could play out, but I'm not ruling out that. But definitely not the case right now. And so for me, it's important to know these facts when you are discussing this, because you could have had like a specific on this, so that tenet 5 does not count with, or is not violated in any way in because a user has not a lockup of their ADA when they're because they only have to delegate to a DREP to claim the rewards or something like that. You can have all these ad hoc things in your constitution, but that's sadly that doesn't work. Like the Hammurabi tried this. They found so many stone tablets, and they tried to make a law for everything, and it doesn't work that way. A constitution has to have its root, and it has to have its principles or tenets, and it has to have its important frame and structure. And from these roots, it will grow a whole legal system. But you don't put all of that in the constitution. That is not how constitutions work, because they will fail if they work that way. They will become so complex that people will not be able to use them, and people will not read them, and people will not live them. And a constitution should be so foundational to you that you should actually have some understanding of it. That's why when I wrote the preamble, I worked so hard on making it memorable, simple, short, to the point, with a root and who we are, where we're going, all of these things that's important for everyone to understand. And the same goes for tenets. They're not a reflection of a perfect logic. You cannot put the perfect logic in a constitution. It is weights, and it's an expression of what we want to achieve, and we have to weight these different things up against each other. And that's how tenets are. We acknowledge the importance of all of them, but sometimes one has more weight than the other, and that's how it is. If we see that security is violated because of another tenant, we might have to weight the security higher, because it's without the security, the whole blockchain fails, and there's no reason for a constitution anymore, as an example. Then they had this other, they call it an inherent contradiction, that you should not both withdraw from treasury, then not be able to delegate to an SPO, because that could compromise protocol security if either, and they say that it may compromise protocol security administration hold ADA for a prolonged period. That's sort of like their argument is that if you're not delegated to an SPO, you're not letting in sufficient amounts of ADA produce blocks, so hostile actors needs less resources to then delegate to pools that could do something bad. But again, this has to be weighted with the rest, and this was actually something was not really from the drafters, was more the delegates who discussed this and really wanted this in. And I can see their point of view. Like, their point of view is that they're too dangerous with withdrawing, that you're delegating also to an SPO. Number one, you actually get an additional tax on top of your treasury withdrawal. It's because you get rewards. So it gets quickly complicated to understand what you're actually taking from the blockchain itself. And then number two, uh, as an SP, you can vote. And if you also could delegate to a DREP, you can certainly vote. And you could have this situation, we call it in Norway, where the oatmeal is put in front of the mule. Like, the people who get an administrator the budget should not be able to vote on future budgets because they can keep themselves going forever, no matter how inefficient they are, for example, and they can be less held accountable in this way because it's easier for them to pass new things if they can use the value of the treasury withdrawal into voting on future treasury withdrawals. And they are supposed to be a neutral administrator. And this has to then be weighted up against the security of protocol with a net change limit as it is now, and in terms of like the total pressure on the SPOs and how decentralized they are, I do not see this as a problem. And I do not see it as a contradiction. And they even acknowledge themselves here, like they contradicted themselves. They're saying that may compromise protocol security if administrators hold ADA for prolonged period. So it's in this edge case that it may be the case, and it's certainly a legitimate question. But the point is, just as tenets, laws in a structure, in a framework of a constitution, has to be weighted against each other, and you cannot write an ad hoc for every single situation. That's not how it works. And if it did, we will be back to Hammurabi and it will fail because it will be too complex, too many, even with AI, even with all these things, because it will make internal illogical. There will be situations where it's an illogical result comparing two things, and the reason for that is that they contradict each other, and then you actually have to then say, look at the third thing. So there's so many scenarios where those types of rule making fails. The best example I've seen of someone trying this is like a legalist where they use Dendantic logic to try to mathematically show that you can make logic of everything. But even then, I would never put that in a constitution. I will put that constitution is the root, and I would likely put on top of that, like say federated papers or frameworks for MBOs or something like that. At that level, it might work because that's so focused that the logic might pass, and then there could be so few edge cases that you can build a repertoire of those types of law. But for a constitution, I'm strongly against that approach. It will fail, and just mark my words if you try that. But in any case, with the current interim constitution and the draft constitution, this was thought of. It was a political will of the delegates to have it this way. And I see their point, and I frankly agree with them. There's no big dangers to the network with the current net change limits, and it's a bigger danger in terms of neutrality of the administrator. All right. I don't know if that was useful, but if you want to give a comment on any of this, like what is your opinion, I would love to discuss on the comment section in YouTube. See you another time.